Hi, this is Tim Santoni, and welcome to the Santoni Spotlight today. I'm joined by Kevin Dykes. Kevin, thanks for joining the show. Appreciate it. Before we get started, maybe give the viewers a little bit of sense of a little bit about yourself, your career, what you do now, and any kind of insight into your world.
Thanks for having me here, Tim. I'm excited to be here, and I am generally in financial services. We help people manage their wealth. I have been in that industry my whole career. I led off with a master's degree in finance out of Boston College. And ultimately, I realized that there wasn't any other career path I knew until I was about 30. My father, my grandfather, all my uncles were all somewhere involved in financial services, wealth management, etc. So by the time I realized there were other careers, it was too late.
So you're born into it, you just didn't really know it.
Very, very true. So today I have a financial services practice, as I mentioned. We specialize in helping business owners, typically private, closely held businesses, grow and manage their wealth.
Nice. And so as you go along in that industry and you accumulate kind of insight and go through different economic cycles, right? I'm sure there's challenges. So what are the typical situations where a client or a business is like, hey, you know what? I think it might be a situation where I need to look at my different options, and you might get a referral or someone might reach out. What are some triggers and some events that might happen with that potential client that we're like, oh yeah, I need to talk to someone like Kevin?
Well, I think one of the areas that we're most razor focused on is emerging growth companies. And I define that as companies that have been in business from about 4 to 7 years, who are out of the startup phase and are becoming profitable. Why those are excellent opportunities for consultation is because it's the first time that they have the fundamental ability and resources to do so. So it's the first time likely that they have income tax liabilities, so income tax mitigation becomes important. It's the first time that their business may have a value on the open market, so planning for the eventual exit, which seems somewhat the antithesis of we've just started this company, but the knowledge is if it's a profitable, sustainable company, you will exit the business at some point. So starting to address those issues, address risks in the business in the first 3 to 4 years, the business requires so much effort to get cash flow, to get off the ground, that it's really premature to start thinking about financial product, etc.
Sure.
So that's
them on the right path. So we talked a little bit before we got started about an event that we're having in a little while, and we talked about that topic. So you mentioned about kind of deferred comp and other ways to incentivize. So as those companies become profitable and the key people are now feeling, okay, we're launched, what are maybe give some ideas without getting too technical for our business owner clients, like what are some options that they can put in place to really have a way to benefit their clients in the long term, protect their kind of tax implications, and really keep those people comfortable and compensated well, and so that hopefully they will stay with the company through exit.
Yeah, I'll say that I typically focus on 3 key areas of planning, and then some additional areas that we think are relevant. So one of the first areas we focus on is, does the company have a formalized and up-to-date buy-sell agreement? This is simply a contract that allows for the transfer of ownership values efficiently in a number of scenarios that may transpire. So that's one of the first areas that we focus on, because now this company is profitable, it has value, could be sold. The second area we concern ourselves with is, are there key individuals inside the organization that the loss of those individuals due to a sickness or a leave of absence or unforeseen circumstances would significantly harm business revenue? That would be a risk mitigation, key person insurance type planning. Those are some fundamental protection items. From there, we start to talk about really employee retention. How do you attract and retain incredible talent inside your organization? And that really falls under a broad umbrella of employee benefits. What things are you offering to your employees that incentivize them to stay at your company? Those can be things like medical, dental, vision, but beyond that, there are things like retirement plans, and a very specific area we get into we call employee or executive fringe benefits, and that's one of the areas that we have specific expertise. What are the special things that you can do for the real stars in your organization?
That's great. And as you bring those kind of different strategies up to business owners? Sounds like you're almost consulting with them at a business level and looking out protect them from risk and also help them invest as they scale and grow. When they see what those options are, what is some of the feedback that you typically get from clients? Or maybe share a story recently where you were working with a client, they engaged you, and what are some things that they typically say as they're scaling through this process and they're working with you?
I think that the primary response to this is oftentimes they're knowledgeable that these are things that they need to do, but in the scope of their daily to-do lists, it tends to sit towards the bottom because they're not things that have an urgency around them until they are urgent, and at that point, unfortunately, it's too late. So many times we just provide potentially the push for the owner to say, hey, here's the issue in front of you, here's the breakdown of how to address it, and simplify the decision-making process to completion. I think that's probably the most likely feedback we get at the end of an initial engagement is, we've been thinking about doing this for years, thanks so much for pushing it through. I think one thing I would add to that, almost all of the things that we do in a business require outside counsel. So be it an attorney, an accountant, other consultants. And so it can be that the coordination of those individuals is beyond the scope of the business or the CFO or controller or office manager inside of it. They're not engaged in putting that team together. And I think that's where we really excel.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, a lot of business owners are focused on the day-to-day. They want to do those different things, but they're like, well, that involves a lot of different people. I got a quarterback that I got to manage it. I don't trust them, especially when you're talking about assets and things like that. So that's a good example of what happens when someone does engage with you in your firm or a scenario that could unfold. What are some things that you see that people are glaringly doing wrong where you get involved and you're like, wow, this is, they don't understand the downside risk of this by not having things in place, or they're really structured things wrong from, just maybe give a couple examples if one comes to mind that they're really exposing themselves unnecessarily.
I think the primary area that I would focus on where things are underdeveloped and they lead to future problems is that clients don't, or business owners, don't appropriately value having an updated agreement, an updated buy-sell agreement. A buy-sell agreement is just simply a contract that structures between partners or owners' interests the activities that would cause the ownership, the equity to transfer hands. And many times you start a business, you set up an operating or partnership agreement. Buy-sell agreement is in that agreement, but no one really thinks about it at all because the business isn't worth anything. So spending a minute on it is really not an appropriate use of anyone's time.
Sure.
Everyone's excited about the new venture and products and sales and clients and making sure things are set up. Sure, it's generally needs to be done because we need to have an operating agreement or we need to have our corporate documents, but then they're ignored. And I think that's where the issue comes in. They're ignored for a period of time until which someone wants to leave the partnership or leave the business, and now we're looking at documents that were written 10 years in advance where no time or consideration was given to this future event. And we know two things. Everyone who owns a business will leave the business. You will leave the business. That business will either dissolve,
right,
you'll retire, you'll be retired, you'll die while working, or you'll be pushed out. You'll sell the business. There's no way
to get around that.
There's no way to get around that.
Okay.
And so having an agreement in place and then going back to that on an annual basis, having it in a corporate minutes, meeting once a year with your attorney, touching that agreement, rereading that agreement, ensuring that things haven't changed and the agreement is up to date is critically important. If that agreement states the value of the business at $1 million and you don't touch that agreement for 4 years and the true value of the business is $10 million, now you have a recipe for disaster, and it's really about litigation.
Yeah.
And you'll find that many businesses are harmed significantly by costly litigation when their agreements are not up to speed and then an event happens that has
Sure.
an owner leaving the business.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that one thing that in our business on the investigative side and working with a lot of attorneys in litigation, one of the first things they look to do is kind of pierce that corporate veil, right? Is it a real corporation? Are they meeting? Do they really have an agreement? What are they really doing to operate as a business? And if they can't even produce that in litigation, that exposes them to additional liability, and then it can expose different aspects of the business where they're like, well, I'm just trying to start a business, run a business, and they don't really think about the basics of just kind of the structure of the business. So.
I'll add one comment to that. Many times, I know it's generally a saying that people use, sometimes it's better to work on your business than in your business. And that is part of the strategies that we do, is taking you out of the day-to-day operations. And many successful entrepreneurs who've gone through many cycles, they'll be adamant, you can make more money working on your business than in it, but making that jump can be difficult.
Sure, it's a great point. Yeah, I think a lot of people use that phrase, but they aren't able to do that for a variety of reasons. Awesome. Well, Kevin, thanks for coming on the show. Before we let you go, maybe share a little bit about what you do in your spare time when you're not helping businesses deal with, on the financial side and plan for growth and mitigate risk. What do you like to spend your free time?
Well, I have 2 young daughters, and I spend most of my free time with them. My wife and I, we live in West Irvine. I'm also generally active, so I do different events. I recently completed a Spartan race with a number of Provisors members. I know some of you may be watching this today.
Awesome.
So generally, physically, just out there, and a big advocate or a big fan of football. I played football at Boston College, and so those are the things that I spend my time on when I'm not dressed up talking to business owners.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely link up Kevin's information in the show notes below. If you have a question, leave them in the comments. We'll make sure that we get back to you. Thanks again for coming on the show, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim. Great to see you.